This just in, local video game company doesn't care about media preservation. In other words, the sky is blue. So if you're watching this video before December 8th, 2025, SEGA announced that on that day, Yakuza 0 is being delisted from most digital platforms: Steam, PS4, and Xbox One. Why? Because on that day, they're going to be replacing it with Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, the quote-unquote definitive version of that game. And this is really upsetting, but honestly not surprising news, because it's just sad that any video game gets removed from a digital storefront, no matter what the reason is. But it's unsurprising because SEGA has had a history over the past few years of delisting games when they're seen as easily replaceable. For example, when Sonic Origins came out in 2022, SEGA delisted the classic Sonic Genesis trilogy from Steam, 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles, plus CD, because they thought, yeah, people will just play Sonic Origins to get their classic Sonic fix. Even though a lot of fans really don't see it as an ideal way to play those games. In 2024, SEGA delisted Sonic Generations from Steam to make room for Sonic X Shadow Generations, though at least in that case, you can still get the original version of Sonic Generations through a Steam bundle with other classic Sonic games. So while it's not an ideal solution, it's at least a solution. In that same year, SEGA removed a ton of their back catalog from Steam, whether it be other Genesis ROMs or games from the Sega Saturn/Dreamcast era like Space Channel 5, Crazy Taxi, Nights into Dreams, and Sega Bass Fishing for seemingly no reason at all. And now they're doing the same with Yakuza 0. Now, I want to make it clear right off the bat, I am not that familiar with Yakuza as a franchise. The only entry that I've gotten the chance to play myself is Yakuza 0 on my PS4. And even then, that was only for about an hour or two because I need to get some footage for my video on Super Monkey Ball 2 on my main channel. Because if you don't know, the team that makes Yakuza is the same studio that makes Super Monkey Ball, and I wanted to make a point about that in my video. And I also have the first game from the Like a Dragon saga on Steam from a Humble Bundle I got a while ago, but I haven't gotten the chance to play it yet. But Yakuza is a series that I genuinely do want to get into because I've heard so many great things about this series. And in the case of Yakuza 0 in particular, from what I've gathered from the fan base, this is the one that people most often say is really good. Every other game tends to be very hit or miss depending on who you talk to. With Yakuza 0, it seems to be the most universally acclaimed entry in the series. And that's a good sign considering that is technically the first game within the timeline of the franchise, so it makes it easy for anyone to jump into it. Even beyond the timeline stuff, the accessibility was through the roof with that game because of its competitive pricing for one. Like, it remained at $20 for so many years. Like, I got my copy for $10 on a Black Friday deal many years ago. And in the case of PC users, it's not that technically demanding of a game to run either. You can run as far back as a Windows 7 computer, it only uses 4 gigabytes of RAM at minimum, and it only took up about 20 to 25 gigabytes of storage space. So even if your computer is not the strongest in the world, if you're exclusively a PC player, you would be able to run this game pretty smoothly. So with Director's Cut coming into the picture, a lot of that accessibility is thrown out the window, because that version is going to be $50 in price, more than double what you can get for the original version right now. For PC users, it seemingly only runs on Windows 11 computers, uses up much more RAM, and is about quadruple the storage size. And if you're a PS4 and Xbox One user that only buys games digitally, you're basically being screwed over because the Director's Cut is only available on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, and the Switch 2 as well, but I'm talking about platforms that didn't have the original, which the Switch never got it. And that's not a good look when all the other games are still available digitally, and that also includes Yakuza Kiwami 3 on the PS4 since that's releasing digitally next year. anymore. So when you don't have the first game in the timeline on those digital storefronts, it leaves a really bad taste in the mouth. And it would be one thing if this director's cut was like unanimously loved, and I haven't played the director's cut myself, but from what I can gather, many fans see this as a weaker version compared to the original. There really aren't that many additions to the director's cut, and the ones that they did add for the most part seem to detract from the experience. And I want to emphasize that these are not my opinions, just the consensus I seem to get from fans who have played director's cut. And for what I noticed, they did 3 major things in this version. They added an English dub, which fans don't seem to be that fond of, especially in the case of the main character, Kazuma Kiryu. And that's kind of important if you want to get immersed in this world. If you can't believe the main character, that's kind of a problem. They also add about half an hour's worth of new cutscenes into the game, which I heard actually detract from the story, because apparently they retcon some character deaths in it, and they do it in such a haphazard way to sort of justify why those characters never show up again later games. And knowing that, I'm sure would really take me out of that story experience. And then the last major addition is an online multiplayer mode where people battle hordes of enemies with each other. And that seems to be the only addition that fans actually kind of like. But judging from footage, it seems to be kind of a throwaway mode, in my opinion. The kind of thing that you would try once and then just move on from, but that's just me. But yeah, this is the version that SEGA wants you to play now. And when it does enough to ruin the story for a lot of people, that's not exactly a great sign, especially for those that want to get into the series and they never have. This is just another sign that shows that video game companies really could not care less about game preservation and the intent that the original developers had when making the original versions of these games. We've seen this time and time again in the industry, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. And that's not really the case for other mediums. Like, for example, in the music industry, if you want to listen to, let's say, a Pink Floyd album from 50 years ago, you can easily find it on services like Spotify or Apple Music or Tidal and stream it, or you could still buy easily accessible vinyls or CDs of those albums. And that's the case for like most major artists out there, because the music industry does understand to an extent that our history is very important. We want to preserve that for people. You could say the same thing about the book industry, and I would say the movie industry as well, but given all the streaming service nonsense, it doesn't look bright in that industry right now. But the video game industry has never once cared about preservation, and it's why video games have been one of the biggest targets for piracy since basically the computer was invented. At least the computer in the modern sense. Now, there is somewhat of a silver lining here in the fact that another website that distributes PC games, GOG, from what I could tell, the original version of Yakuza 0 is going to stay on their platform, since I've heard that they actually have a much stronger stance on video game preservation, so that's a good sign at the very least. In the case of the PS4, physical copies are always going to be out there in the wild, and I really, really hope that the prices don't go up ridiculously in price because of the delisting. But that's sort of just been a big trend for older games that just aren't in print anymore to go up in price, especially since the pandemic. Yeah, I did say PS4 specifically, but there are physical prints on Xbox One as well, but they seem to be in much more limited quantity, since I think that was only distributed from Limited Run, which that's kind of lame. So if you're watching this before the delisting, my advice to you is if you want to get into the Yakuza franchise, buy the original version of Yakuza 0 now. It is dirt cheap to get. Here in America, it's on sale for $11 on Steam right now. Plus, even if you're someone that would prefer just playing the director's cut, digital owners of the Steam, PS4, and Xbox One versions can upgrade to the director's cut for only $15. So you would be saving money getting the original version and then upgrading to director's cut compared to just getting Director's Cut by itself. Now, the delisting doesn't mean anything for me in particular because, like I said, I already have Yakuza 0 on my PS4. I have a physical copy of that. This is just another case as to why I generally prefer physical media as a whole, because they can't just rip the copy away from you if it's not an online-only game. But for PC-only players or just digital-only players, this sucks. It really, really sucks. This has been the opinion of a Yakuza tourist. Tune in to me 5 years from now when I 100% every single game in the series and start singing Baka Mitai unprompted for no reason and annoy all of my friends forever. God bless and have a good one. Bye-bye.